You're listening to another episode of the Smart Agency Masterclass. I'm your host, Jason Swenk, where we believe that having the right systems in place is the difference between you growing and scaling your agency or struggling. And I want to help you out. Now, on today's show, we have Lee, who is going to blow your mind at the curse of knowledge. He's a famous author, and he's run an agency, and he's been doing this for a long time, and he's done very well. And we go over a lot of things that I think you're breaking the rules on that can actually help you out and really help you clarify your message and make it clear so people understand. Because if you confuse, you're going to lose. So let's get into the episode. Hey Lee, how's it going, man?
It's good. Good. How are you?
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. I love the content that you put out, and I actually watched that video that you did on what the heck is Twitter many moons ago. So for those who don't know who you are, give us a brief intro of what you do, who you are, and why we should listen to you.
Wow. My name is Lee Lefever, and I founded and run a company called Commoncraft. And we're mostly known for being one of the early creators of explainer videos. We started making videos in 2007 that were 3 minutes and used paper cutouts on a whiteboard. And we took subjects like RSS and wikis and social networking back in the day and explained them for people. And for a little while, we were internet famous back in the 2007 version of internet famous. But we actually turned that into a business eventually, where we got into doing a lot of work, being hired to make explainer videos. And then today, Commoncraft is essentially a subscription service that educators use. We make videos and visuals that often educators, but also professionals of all types use to do presentations and classroom teaching. And our focus continues to be explanation, like really making explanation a strategy, a competitive advantage, a way to earn attention by being clear more than anything else. And in 2012, I also wrote a book called The Art of Explanation.
Awesome. Yeah. Everybody should check out that book because it goes over some really amazing things. And in the book, you talk about kind of the curse of knowledge, right? Can you explain that to us? Because I know everybody, including myself, yes, myself.
No, surely not.
Well, I don't know much knowledge, but the knowledge I do know, it gets dangerous. So explain that to us a little bit.
Sure. I first heard about it from a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, which is a book that I really recommend. But the curse of knowledge is this idea that the more you know about something, the harder it is to imagine what it's like not to know. So our knowledge curses us. And what happens when we're cursed like that is that we find it hard to imagine what it's like in someone else's shoes when we're talking about our agency or our business or what we do. We think it sounds great, that they're getting it all because we talk that language every day. We're surrounded with those people every day. All the examples, all the jargon that we use sounds natural. But then when someone comes out of the blue and says, what do you do? And it sounds crazy to them, that's the curse of knowledge talking. And I have it, as you said, you have it. It's a part of human nature. And I think that it's probably one of the biggest things to overcome in communication is adjusting your assumptions and trying to make accurate assumptions about what your audience already understands.
So give us an example of kind of someone doing it really bad and how do you overcome it? I mean, you don't have to call out anybody. I mean, it would be nice.
Yeah. Well, I think that the sort of classic example that you think of is talking to a mechanic who you go in and what's wrong with my car? And they start talking about all the mechanical stuff that if you're not a mechanic just sounds like gibberish. And you just kind of have to trust them that, okay, I guess that's something I need to fix then. And, that's just one example. A lot of technical professions are like that, like scientists, engineering, legal, medical. They're very smart, accomplished people, but they're also surrounded with people who speak the same language and they're often cursed. And again, they often think they sound, and we all do, we think we sound brilliant. But there's a difference between being brilliant and being understandable. And that's really my cause, is trying to put the focus on helping people feel confident by talking to them in a way that's understandable.
And you know what happens is, like, when you're talking to someone and they're kind of like the doctor, like a doctor's a great example of this. He's like, oh yeah, your cardiovascular something is all messed up. I'm like, and you don't want to look dumb, and you're like, yeah, I get that. And you just kind of agree with it, and then you kind of move on. And I think that happens in the agency space all day long. Like you talk about, oh yeah, we need to take your landing page, do a conversion rate from 23% to this pay-per-click, do this retargeting, and then you'll start getting leads, which then will convert to opportunities. And literally, and the person's like, yeah, that sounds cool. Does that add to revenue? Or they don't even say that. And then they go to someone that, kind of talk down to their level, right? And educated them, and you make them feel kind of inferior, I think, right? When you talk this way.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I would say about that. I think that one of the risks, and one of the things that I think people think about when they think about wanting to explain something, is the potential for condescension. That if you try to make something too simple, dumb it down too much, then you make it sound like that you're talking to a dumb person, and that will not help your relationship. That is a relationship killer as soon as someone thinks they're being condescended to. And unfortunately, condescension is not something that people do consciously. Nobody wants to be condescending. But that's kind of something that people have to sort of think more about. And one of the ways that I think about that is that it seems like the goal of explanation is to be as simple as possible, like dumb it down like for a 5-year-old. And like, that's like a recipe for condescension. I think the goal is actually familiarity, like getting a feel for what is familiar to them. And if you use familiar as your goal, then you're more likely to talk at their level and not come off like a condescending jerk. Yeah. So one more point about that, that you mentioned early on about not wanting to admit that you don't know something. I think that happens all the time. And it's sort of this negative feedback loop where nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I don't understand, right? Because if you do that, then you're slowing the meeting down. You might look dumb in front of your peers. So the speaker never gets feedback that they're not understandable. So they never change. So there's a negative feedback loop that kind of keeps this need for clarity, need for understanding sort of under the surface, because nobody wants to be the person that says, hey, I don't understand. Yeah. And I want people to feel more confident about that. And I wish whole organizational cultures would be more open to that.
Yeah. Well, I think of a quote from Albert Einstein, and this is the only one I can remember, but he says, I think something like, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And, right. And that's so true. And I think as business owners and entrepreneurs, we try to put ourselves on a pedestal, and we try to look like, we know everything. And when you do that, that could hurt you. And so, like, what's the happy medium? Like, how do you know, like, because I know when I'm chatting with some people and I'm like, and I explain something, I'm like, do you understand? Like, I want to like take a pause. Like, is there anything you have questions on? And I want to make sure, like, help me out, dude. Like, I want to make sure I'm not like smacking him in the face, being like, all right, idiot, do you get it?
Sure. So I actually think that a strategy for doing that is to do it not after, but before you say something, and set the tone where you kind of can make it lighthearted and say, look, I don't know what you know, so I'm going to explain this as simply as I can. And like, forgive me if it sounds crazy, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. And by setting that expectation, I think you have creative license to be a little bit off base. They see that you're going to go in a different direction, so that you're not just coming at them with this weird, like, suddenly he went Sesame Street on me kind of a feel.
Well, you're framing it. You're framing it and saying, like, and you're being nice to be like, look, you could be the most brilliant person in the world and know everything about, neuroscience or whatever it is, but I'm going to assume this, and then you kind of get a hall pass, right?
Yeah, that's right. You know who I think is really good at that is Neil deGrasse Tyson. Brilliant guy. There's a reason that he's all over the media, is because he knows a ton, but is also really great at finding these great little ways of explaining things that make it open to everybody.
Yep. I want to take a minute and tell you about Quilla, which is our episode sponsor. And it's an amazing proposal software. They save you time and help you close deals a lot quicker by eliminating that boring old proposal. They allow you to create stunning website proposals with video, image galleries, form. Your prospect can sign and even pay online. It integrates with your project management software, your accounting software, and so much more. From my own experience, if I could go back in time with my agency, I would definitely check out Quilla. So I want you to go to jasonswank.com/proposal software. That's jasonswank.com/proposal software. So how can we, let's take the agency website or our marketing, right, that we're doing, because a lot of agencies are struggling with like, I'm getting awareness, but they're just not converting, or I'm not separating myself from everybody else, right? So what are some things that they can start doing?
That's a good question. You know, I'm a big fan, obviously, of visuals and videos. I think a lot of the videos out there that for someone that I think is not everybody is great on camera. I think face-to-face can be great, but I think there's also a role for helping people think conceptually about something. I'm not as involved in the agency world as you and maybe some of your viewers, so I can't speak from like everyday experience. But one of the rules that I really live by is that people don't buy what they don't understand, and like, helping someone understand something is different than selling them on something. Like, that understanding is like a higher level concept that answers questions like, why should I care about this? Or why is this relevant to me? And when you have the curse of knowledge, those things seem like givens. They seem like everybody that comes to your website already knows why you matter. They already know why an agency, needs this or that. And I think taking a step back and thinking like, well, what is it that they need to understand? Like, what is the higher level version of understanding of like, well, what role does an agency play in the world? And that doesn't necessarily have to be on the front page, but it can be something that's like curious about what an agency is, kind of a sidebar that gives those people who are curious a path to go down that they can help them see like, oh, I see the role that they play in my world.
Yeah.
So that's an idea.
Yeah. Or asking questions that be like, what are they struggling with? What do they actually want? Right. Rather than leading with your service, be like, no one cares that you do SEO. No one cares that you do video, but they care about what video or SEO can do for them. And I think if you kind of make it focused on that and you ask questions where, I always, like, if I could turn my whole website into a question mark, like question.com, I wish I could buy that domain name, I would. Because the cool thing about asking questions is it turns the attention on the visitor or the person digesting the content. And that's like having that person come up to you at the networking event and asking you a question. You're like, this is the best conversation. I'll be like, yeah, because it's about you.
Yeah, that reminds me of, the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's these very simple things that you'd think like, do we really need a book about how to win friends? And some of the things
people do.
Like, you should remember people's names. You should ask them questions. Like, wow, these are really amazing things. But I compare that to explanation because it's like this thing that happens all the time, and it's easy to assume that you're doing it right or that it's working. But sometimes all it takes is an idea for you to take a step back and think, wow, this is something I could actually do better. I could actually ask people their questions, but you've seen it. You go to conferences, you talk to people all the time who only talk about themselves or, that kind of dynamic that always kind of surprises me.
And you guys don't want to portray that in your marketing. And the scary thing is your marketing is doing that. Like I'm checking out all their websites and most of them are all doing that, and it's hard to get away. What you've mentioned in the past that there's kind of like 3 or 4 questions that you ask, like when looking at a website, because I look at the website as the central hub of everything that they do, right? So, like, what are some of the questions that they should be able to ask themselves, and if they stepped out of their body, like if they looked at it, from subjectively,
saw it for the first time. Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't claim to be an interface or a designer, like a front page expert or anything, but I think that there's a certain what happens with a lot of, I'm sure agencies too, is their website ends up being sort of being compared to other agency websites, and they're all kind of playing the same game of like, well, this is what an agency website is supposed to be. And I think that's like the curse of knowledge just being iterated over and over. And I like websites that are very clear up front about, getting through the jargon and talking about what problem they solve. Like what problem they solve, what place do they play in the world for someone like me.
Yep.
That is a little bit less jargon free. I think jargon gets a bad rap, and rightly so for the most part, but it's that idea of familiarity. Like what's familiar to your target market, and speaking in a language that they feel like, oh, they're talking to me, they're talking my language. And that, like, to my point before, that doesn't mean super simple. It just means that there's lots of niches, and finding your niche and finding a way for those people to experience your website and say, this is for me. They get me. I think is a valuable thing.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as kind of like, who is this for? What do we offer, and what can we actually do for them? And like, if you can answer those three questions, I think in any of your marketing, and a lot of you kind of skip over the who is this for, right? It's just like, it's for everybody.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think you're right. You go to like CRM software or something like that, and it's just this crazy bunch of stuff that I don't recognize. And I've learned to say, okay, this is not for me. This is not that they're communicating poorly. It's just that it's not for me. And I think that goes back to that question of every website owner thinking, well, who is this for really? And what language is going to work for them? And how can I help them understand that I'm working for them? Yeah, exactly. That I can help them.
Exactly. Well, is there any question, Lee, that I have not asked you that would benefit the audience?
I don't know if there's a specific question, but there was maybe one more point that I could make.
Perfect.
Is that I think that the idea of clarity and being understandable is actually something that can be a competitive advantage. I think if someone is, say, shopping through a lot of agencies trying to figure out what they want, I think there's a competitive advantage in being able to communicate in a way that make people say like, wow, they taught me something. They showed me that an agency can actually communicate in a way that is clear and effective, and it doesn't just sound like they're trying to sell. That these people are saying, wow, I want to help you understand how agencies actually fill a gap in my world that needs to be filled. And I think there's the explanation skills are a part of that, and really focusing on understanding more than sales.
Yeah. And that all takes understanding your customer and really identifying that and niching down or niching down. I was on a podcast interview in Australia, sure. And then one of my clients in London, and they were like, niche, stop redneck. Like butchering their English language. I'm like, I'm from the South.
Yeah.
And so,
for sure.
But awesome. Well, cool. Well, Lee, how can people reach you outside of the book? And we'll link up, the book in there as well.
Yeah. So I'm at Lee Lefever, my name, at Gmail. If anybody wants to email me, that's great. Lee Lefever, same. Basically my name, Lee Lefever, is there's no competition for it for handles. So if you're looking for me on Twitter, Instagram, I'm Lee Lefever. We have online courses at explaineracademy.com, and Common Craft is the home of everything. We have all our videos. We have a library of cutouts for presentations and videos. So Explainer Academy and commoncraft.com are the places to look.
Awesome. Well, Lee, thanks so much for coming on. And guys, I want you to do a couple things. If you're not subscribed to the podcast or however you're digesting this content, make sure you do it, or I'm going to find you. I'm going to reach in the screen and get you. And then also, you should have taken away, Lee dropped all kinds of bombs. I want you to pick one, take action on it, and actually go do it. Go do it now. Put it in your little tasks and literally go do it, because you can learn all this stuff, but if you don't implement it, it's worthless. So go do it now. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you go to swankit.com. Or, I'm sorry, I just messed that up. And you'll see the editing, swank.it. Later, guys.